Before we get into questions, I want to make sure that we have your permission to record you and that we'll use this for educational purposes only, not profit.
Forfeit all my intellectual property right
Thank
here.
you so much. We're interviewing today on April 24th, 2022 with Mateo Zapata, a working artist in Pilsen, and we're going to start now. I'm going to get us started. Mildred and Isa will take over in a little bit, but I'm going to get started and ask, can you tell us about your upbringing, where you're from, and just a little bit about you?
Yeah, for sure. I was born in Colombia. My mother was from Chile. She exiled during the military dictatorship. And then we moved here when I was really, really young to Chicago. First we lived on the north side when we first came to the city. Then we moved to Pilsen, and I've been here for like over 20 years. I've been here ever since. One of my first experiences with media and art was some of my first experiences with art and media was at a local radio station and youth art center called Yo Locali, Radio Arte on 18th Street. That was literally one of the only places I could go to just kind of get away from what the sort of environment was like here, 15 years ago. It's very different than what it is now. And it got to the point where it was a space that really, I think, celebrated, right? Like what I was doing even as a young person. Like it got to the point where I was able to host open mics, as a 16-year-old and have my own radio show, on air as a 16-year-old. So I think that definitely built a lot of character and sort of just self-trust in my own ability to be creative, right? And to try to take that serious because, you're in a public school system that could care less about you being creative or, whether or not you're talented at this or that when it comes to art, right? After that, I did go to Lane Tech. I ended up getting kicked out and I went to Latino Youth in Little Village, which is an alternative high school. It used to be on the boulevard before. Graduated from there, worked full-time a few years just to help my mom out because my parents were divorced at the time, and then went back to UIC, graduated from there. Since then, I worked in the nonprofit space for a few years, worked for CPS as a counselor, and then I had this opportunity like 8 years ago to go on the road with Molotov. I was starting to get back into the creative side really hard, right? In terms of my photography, my design, my art, my video work. And I got the chance to cover all their content for a national tour. So I just quit. I quit my job and I was like, I'm out. And
you had a day job at the time?
I was at CPS.
Okay.
I was at CPS at the time. And I loved it. I worked at Hancock on 56th and Pulaski. It's an amazing school, great students. And there's just a lack of men of color in public education. So the ability to really impact and encourage, these young people to do something after high school, right, was very, visible. Like they were super receptive to it, which from what I, saw at other schools was not the norm. Ever since I went on tour with Molotov, I basically have been just freelancing.
You mentioned several different media you were working in. You're doing sound, you're doing photography, you're doing visual stuff. Were you just sort of interested in the arts in general, sort of across media forms?
Growing up, I was always surrounded by people that were involved in hip hop, right? Whether it was graffiti writers, where there was MCs, and growing up around that, you just realize the versatility in what you can do when you're creative, and how that defines your identity, right? And how you can assert that by being creative. I think multimedia has always been interesting. Probably since the first time I had to record and interview people on like a mini disc, right, for Radio Arte. Like they literally would give us the equipment and say, go to 18th and talk to, you know, whoever you want. And so I think that experience was just, you know, it was very nuanced and very unique in the perspective of being able to capture stories.
I remember mini discs, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Classic.
Great. So you go on tour with Molotov. You're documenting them visually, right? A tour, and then that just gave you the guts to say, I'm not going to go back to a day job. I'm going to devote myself to being a working artist.
More or less. I mean, I knew CPS wasn't going to take me back, you know, because obviously I left and I'm like, yeah, I got to go. And yeah, I think when I got back, it was just sort of, you know, rediscovering the possibility of really being able to be creative and then challenging myself to accept that and to pursue that as far as I could. And, you know, I've made it this far, so.
Great. You're up.
So you mentioned your upbringing. You were born in Colombia, and you have one of your parents is from Chile, correct?
Yeah.
So how has being bicultural and having parents who are immigrants influenced your art and your drive to promote social change through art?
It's a great question. I mean, it was difficult at first understanding why I'm in a country that, you know, sponsored a military dictatorship in Chile, right? And why I'm in a country that completely destabilized the economy and politics in Colombia for decades under the guise of a drug war, right? So that I think in itself took me a while to sort of like get over, right? Because I definitely was very, I think, resistant to wanting to even be bicultural. You know, I was like, no, I'm good. I'm Colombian and Chilean. Yo soy colombiano. I'm Latino. Like, you know, and I didn't even want to become a citizen until I was like, I think like 19 or 20. I was like a resident the whole time. You know, just because I didn't really feel like I wanted to because of, you know, that background and because of what, you know, because you start thinking about why did your parents migrate here? Like, why did I end up in Chicago, right? And it's because, like, you know, obviously the situations there were not tolerable, right? Or safe enough to the, you know, degree where, like, your parents are like, okay, he's gonna have more opportunity over there.
Do you know why they picked Chicago?
They had other family here, so that was the move for Chicago. And yeah, I mean, I think I've always carried that sense of awareness with me, right? The sense of history, the sense of, you know, the impact of U.S. foreign policy throughout Latin America, right? From Mexico, Puerto Rico, all the way down to Chile, right? And being very cognizant of that and what that means for us as a community here in the United States. And understanding how important it is for us to be cognizant of that and to not sort of perpetuate, right, these stigmas of, you know, discrimination, oppression, or classism to continue to occur in our communities here after they happened in the countries that we came from on a massive scale. So yeah, no, it's definitely impacted, you know, everything I think I do is creative.
How old were you when you came to the U.S.?
I was like 1.
Okay.
Super young, yeah.
Sorry, one more follow-up question,
Yeah.
Mildred, if you don't mind. What did you major in at UIC?
Latino studies.
Got it.
Yeah. I wanted to do a double, but I needed to graduate and work. I had enough credits because I placed out of the Spanish. They used to do a test where you could take the test and you get all the credits. So I was like one class away from, I think, a minor in Spanish, and then I was like, I think 2 courses away from a double in poli-sci. So that was kind of what I wanted to do, but I had to get out.
We're big fans of the Latino Studies major, so.
So when you're looking at like all these like Latinx issues, they're talking about like U.S. foreign policy interactions with like Latin American kids, but like in your work you also look at like U.S. social movements going on.
Of course, yeah.
You know, a lot of recognition for your like Black Lives Matter movement and things, and all the stuff surrounding the pandemic and like essential workers and all of that. So when we were like researching you, we saw a lot about like photography specifically. And so how do you see like in what ways the photography
I think at the core, it's about telling our story, right? Even if you walk down 18th Street, you see a lot of decorative art, right? Because of the gentrification, a lot of commercial stuff. You'll see like, you know, a Hello Kitty with the Frida eyebrow or something, right? Like that's not really telling a story, right? That's just super appealing, very decorative, looks cute. But, you know, if you study the history of this neighborhood and the impact and meaning of muralism here, it's like, hold on, like what's, you know, what are we doing here? But for me, it's about telling a story, telling our story through our lens, with our pen, you know, with our paintbrushes, with our spray paint cans, and you know, with our own voices. Because I think that even what's happened throughout Latin America is that you get a very white American lens that tries to figure out what happened in Chile, right? That tries to figure out or define, you know, the narcotics enterprise of Colombia and the impact it had on politics. And you look at Mexico now, right? You could argue that it's a narcocracy to the fullest, right? But is an American lens going to use that word? Probably not, right? So I think it's definitely about just telling our story and being in control of our own narrative.
You touched upon one of the biggest issues of our research into the Pilsen neighborhood, which is like the role of art in this neighborhood, in this community. Decorative art versus political art. What's your take on that?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily put it on those two opposite sides of the spectrum. I'm sorry, I wouldn't put it on those two opposite sides of the spectrum, because there's art that isn't necessarily political that can still be incredibly powerful, right? You know, Mauricio Ramirez just did an amazing piece across the street from Los Comales of, you know, like this super tall, strong, like Aztec warrior, you know, and I mean, that's not necessarily political, but it's, you know, it's incredibly powerful for a young, right, Mexican kid who's walking down, dealing with the, you know, barriers of breaking down what does it mean to be bicultural, and then he sees this huge heroic figure that looks like him, right? That's incredibly powerful. I think, you know, art is always going to evolve, and art is interpretive. Art comes in various different forms, right? You can run across probably a few stencils on 18th Street that just have a phrase, right? That's a form of art as well. You know, my thing is just the erasure of muralism that was built with the purpose of telling a story and of capturing a certain moment in history, that whoever, you know, made that artwork, right, or whoever took that photograph or whoever wrote that article, they did that because they felt like if they didn't do it, no one's gonna know this happened, right? Like when I wrote an article, I wrote it because I felt like I had to, because I was like, man, no one's gonna write this. Like, you know, I can't not at least try, right? I don't know if it's gonna get published. I don't know if people are gonna read it, if people are gonna understand what I'm trying to say, but let me at least try. And so I think that there's a huge, you know, collective school era of artists and creatives that tried in this neighborhood, and it wasn't trendy, it wasn't safe, it wasn't cool to come around, there were no tours at the time, no one cared that these guys were painting what they were doing, you know? I spoke with Aurelio Diaz when I arranged and helped out for the restoration of his mural on 18th and Racine, which was repainted and restored by Rufus, who is another amazing muralist with a crazy story in this neighborhood. But, you know, no one cared that Aurelio was painting this. And if you look at that mural, has so many like messages in it and so much power, right?
You're talking about A La Esperanza? The one
No, queda en la pared de Honky Tonk. Yeah. It's super powerful, and it talks about this whole, it's interesting because in my opinion, I think it's one of the only pieces in Chicago that I think sort of offers this pan-Latino kind of approach to identity, where it's like, no, it's not, even though we're all Mexican here, it's not just about Mexicans. It's about Centroamericanos, Sudamericanos, and it's in there. And the moment that's getting captured is students painting protest signs. That's what that, mural is. And so, I just think it's super dangerous, and it really destructive to our community, to our identity, if you start erasing those stories and erasing those moments.
Since you've been working in Pilsen, what kind of erasures have you seen?
Oh man, I mean, the gentrification, obviously brings erasure. There's some people that think that gentrification is even a form, or could be a form of trauma, right? For people that are in a community, they come back to where they grew up, their roots, their childhood memories that define their identity, but then stuff isn't there anymore, right? Like, what does that do to your psyche? But to answer your question, as far as erasure goes, I think one of the biggest moments of that here was Casa Aztlán. And I actually performed there when I was younger, which is crazy. I actually saw a photo of me performing there like recently, and I didn't even know that there was like a photo. But no, Casa Aztlán was like the first, like fully resourced cultural center in the neighborhood. Like, you could go to classes there. You could go and get like a t-shirt with Mateo Zapata on it or whatever, There was all these cultural celebrations and music and, the art, scene was very much celebrated and supported there too. And it was just a safe space, in a neighborhood that needed one. And no one came and put it there either. It was people from the neighborhood that were like, nah, we need something, because this isn't gonna, you can't have these kids in an environment like this without having this incredibly powerful cultural center. So I think, to answer your question, that was definitely probably the first and more significant moments of erasure I've witnessed.
When they painted over Casa Aztlán, it was such a flashpoint in neighborhood discussions, and really bigger discussions, national discussions about gentrification and the battle over housing and space. Did you have any role, like, were you already working in the neighborhood at that time? Like, did you?
Oh yeah.
Were you part of the response to it?
I mean, ¿cómo te podía decir? Eso está difícil. Bueno, mira. For me, it's like, look, a lot of people were angry after it got torn down. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it's like, where were you before this happened? Why did this organization just need, I think it was like $125K? That's all they had to pay the bank to get the building. And there was no effort to fundraise for that. There was no push. There was no, one of these initiatives, right? We're like, hey, we need to reach this so we don't lose this, amazing historical landmark, symbol in our community, staple. And there was none of that was done. Even the organization that had it just kind of threw in the towel and was like, whatever. And so I think therein lies the fault, right? In my opinion. I mean, I think it can be complicated if you're protesting and calling for change after the change has already happened and it was allowed to happen.
Sorry, before we change the subject, just one more question about that. What's your opinion of what happened in the end, where they brought in old school artists to repaint it over? And...
I don't know. I think it was. I don't think the situation was handled well because the original artist just wasn't involved. The original guy that did that work never got the opportunity to do it. Like when I wanted to restore Aurelio's piece, which was falling apart, it was super damaged. I called him. And I was like, hey, can you come to Chicago? Like, what's good? Like, we can maybe fundraise something. You've done so much here and you've been gone for so long, are you down? Like, what do you want to do? And he was straight up like, nah, man. He's like, I'm too old. I'm I got some health issues, whatever. He's like, maybe next year. But he's like, if Rufus wants to restore it, he's like, do it, you know? And I think those kind of conversations and that kind of communication is what is needed, you know, in a community like this when you have so many different eras of people that have done so much work.
Thanks.
Speaking on that, I was like thinking through your Instagram and you touched on like Oscar Romero accidentally over Roswell's tribute pieces.
Yeah.
And so I think that touches a lot on like the things that you've been talking about. But like you said, trauma is real on all the sides here. It's not going to heal itself in the thread.
Facts.
And but just like thinking about like gentrification as a trauma, I think is like a really interesting way to put it. And also looking at how there's like you were talking about erasure and like that sense of like newer and older generation of Pilsen artists and like that shared respect for artwork. They're talking about like trying to talk with the artist before restoring their piece. So how do you see like respect between artists like and grappling also like this new gentrification piece and how Pilsen is like trying to work with that?
That's a lot. I mean, look, I'll be very honest with you. I don't think there's enough communication or dialogue. Not even between different generations, but just between creatives, period. You know, and I don't think it's just simply a symptom of Pilsen. I think it's a symptom of Chicago. You know, I think that because of the decades of segregation in this city, the decades of marginalization in this city, you know, people are just sometimes comfortable with being disconnected. And I think it's difficult for them to challenge themselves to break through those barriers and to be open to that kind of dialogue, right? There's amazing artists in this neighborhood that are around the same age who will not sit down next to each other at a table. Just, you know, because they just don't, they never have, they never did, and they don't want to anymore. And it shouldn't be that way. But like I said, I don't think it's just an issue in this neighborhood. I think it's an issue in Chicago, because it's the same issue. Like, you got cats on the north side in certain neighborhoods that don't like, you know, people in other parts of the neighborhood for reasons that shouldn't really, you know, build those barriers up that much, you know?
We're a neutral party. We don't want to stir up any drama in Pilsen, but I think it is interesting and important for us to ask, you know, like where do you think those conflicts come from between artists?
I think it's, you know, Chicago has at its core, and I grew up in Pilsen when it wasn't gentrified. I grew up in Chicago, going, you know, hanging out in Humboldt Park, you know, hanging out in Logan Square before Logan Square was gentrified. You know, my best friend lived on Diversey, right next to the J.J. Peppers and the projects on Diversey. You know, I would kick it in Uptown, back when Uptown had projects too, and it was very different than what it is now. It wasn't gentrified. I was here in this neighborhood, so I think as a city, Chicago is just very territorial. You know, and it's, I don't know if it's a mafia mentality. I don't know if it's a gang mentality. I don't know if it's, you know, just sort of like, this is my neighborhood mentality. But I think it's very territorial, you know, and it always has been. I mean, growing up, I grew up on Morgan. To get to the train station and go to Lane, I had to walk through like 6 different, you know, gang territories. You know what I mean? It's you know, it's crazy to think about, you know, young people having to go through that. Yeah, I mean, even when I've, you know, just to get out of the Pilsen bubble for a second here, even when I wrote an article about something happening in Little Village, there were people that thought that I shouldn't be writing about Little Village because I didn't grow up there. So I shouldn't write about anything happening there. And, you know, what does that mean then? Does that mean that I should be segregated to just write about what happens in the, you know, mile radius of where I grew up at? Are you going to tell a journalist that lives in Bucktown that he shouldn't write about Little Village too, or are you just telling me that because I'm brown and I'm from the neighborhood that's next to yours, you know? So it's I think there's just a very territorial nature to the scene here in Chicago.
I'm going to pass it on to Issa in a second, but I want to ask one more follow-up on gentrification. I think you're maybe like the 11th or 12th artist we've talked to, and one thing that's really surprised me on this project is the very diverse opinions about gentrification. We've had some artists tell us gentrification has changed the neighborhood for the better. You mentioned walking through 6 gang territories. Some artists say there's fewer murders in Pilsen now. There's fewer gangs in Pilsen now. It's safer. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, there isn't fewer gangs. They're all still here. And I mean, I think that's part of the delusion and the appeal and the lie of gentrification, right? Is that if, we gentrify the neighborhood, the gangs are going to disappear. They're still here, and they're still killing people, whether it's not as many as it was, 15 years ago, people are still getting killed, As far as gentrification goes, I don't buy into the myth that it is going to solve problems in a community that still haven't been solved. There's been a lot of young people over the past 2 years that have actually been killed in Pilsen. A lot of shootings still. And I don't think gentrification is going to change that. Because, there's just a lot of history here. A lot of those, factions have been around for about a half a century. It's a long time. I think diversity is good. I will say that. I think it's good for, Latino neighborhoods in Chicago to confront their own anti-blackness and history of it. I think it's good for neighborhoods that were traditionally white to confront their own anti-immigrant, anti-Latino, anti-black, sentiments of the past. I think diversity is good, but gentrification brings about displacement, right? You're forcibly continuing to move immigrant families that already moved, right? And you're just pushing everything further away, but it's still there, right? I think Back of the Yards in Brighton Park, I think is one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in Chicago right now because of that, right? But yeah, I'm not a fan of gentrification. I don't want to see, these businesses, shut down or close. That was one of the biggest issues during the pandemic. There's two corner stores that closed. This one actually, and then one a little further west called Kristen's. Willie's Tire Shop closed. And that's the danger, right? Is that you're continuing to remove, and erase and devalue whatever was there, and say, nah, that's not valuable. This is, and what tends to be seen as more valuable is the white-owned business, right? But yeah, I'm hoping that Pilsen doesn't turn into Logan Square, but time's gonna tell. And obviously what you brought up before about the how segmented and divided the neighborhood is, that that's if people were a little more united, you can deal and confront these kind of things like gentrification. But I think the city still tabled that whole vote on rent control. I don't think they've really made a decision on that, but citywide they're saying that could possibly help slow down gentrification. But yeah, from my understanding, Lori hasn't put that on the table yet.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna shift gears a little bit to talk about Somos Pilsen. In the mural, we read that it features 46 residents.
Yep.
And we just wanted to know more about that. why did you think it was important to incorporate these everyday people and like just maybe the logistics too? Like how do the conversations begin when you ask someone to depict their portrait and stuff?
I had pitched Don Pedro's painting a mural there before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit. Obviously, everybody's trying to survive, do what they got to do. And then one of the sons, family members from Don Pedro's called me and was like, hey, I really want you to do this. You know, would you be down to work with Pablo and figure something out? And I was like, yeah, that's cool. It's a huge wall. For sure.
Is that what drew you to that space in the first place? I mean, it's massive.
I feel that there is a lot of room still in this neighborhood to preserve stories and beautify. Like I produced and curated the Selena mural that was painted by Ascent on Cermak and Wood, right? I got the wall, got him to do it, got the funding, and you know, that took a life of its own, right? And in my head, it was like, why doesn't Chicago have a single sort of ode, right, to this icon that represents this entire bicultural identity, which is very much housed within this community. So no, yeah, I thought the wall for Don Pedro's was an amazing space, and they were super open to it. To answer your question, I think that, you know, Pablo and I were realizing what the value was in sort of the journalism work I was doing, right? And capturing these stories, interviewing essential workers. And I think that initially, you know, there were a lot of different ideas, but I think at the core, we realized that the important part and the beauty behind that would be, can we do this visually, right? Can we capture stories, people, and try to like make a time capsule of whatever, you know, this moment in the neighborhood is. And that's why we, went that route. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting people with very powerful stories on that wall.
Could you talk a little bit about the Phoenix and like it grounding the snake?
Yeah. If you look at the inside of the snake's mouth, there's a message there.
Great, now we have to walk back.
You know, we were at the cusp of, you know, the Trump administration being sort of exposed, right? And I think that we were also reeling with not just, you know, the entire, you know, reckoning of you know, racial injustice in this country, the impact of the pandemic on Black and brown communities, but there was also this just, you know, sort of sensationalizing campaign of incarcerating children, right? Because they're immigrants. And I think that we wanted to address that and how real that was. And so I think the Phoenix is supposed to empower, right? And sort of, at least to me, right? I'm sure Pablo has his own interpretation of it, but, you know, for me, I think it just symbolizes not letting your trauma and your struggle sort of hold you down and define your identity in a negative or toxic way, but in utilizing that to rise up and to sort of define yourself in a more powerful way, because the Phoenix rises from the ashes, right? So yeah, that's what that means to me.
We noticed that in that piece and in some of your photography, there's this real celebration of everyday people.
Yeah.
What draws you to doing that in your work? Also, the one, Corazon de Chicago.
I'm just not into like commercial stuff, man. I'm not into like you know, I don't really get much out of taking a portrait of someone with makeup on and filters and lights and reflectors and 3 flashes pointed in different directions so the hair shines in this way because it is gonna look good after I Photoshop it for an hour. That does nothing for me. That's not sort of the kind of photography that I think has power, in my opinion. I think there's people that are great at that and they should keep doing it and it's cool, but For me, I think reality is what is important to me, because I think that there's so much about the reality of young people growing up in Chicago, young people growing up in Pilsen, Little Village, Brighton Park, Back of the Yards, Humboldt Park, and the city as a whole. There's a lot of that reality that isn't being seen, it isn't being documented, and it isn't being acknowledged. And to me, I'm gonna try as much as I can and as hard as I can to sort of help document what that is before it gets erased.
How do you balance like depicting these great people that they're fighting and all they want change, and also documenting like their struggle without making it seem like, oh, you should pity these people?
It's difficult. I mean, it's draining to continue to have to document death. And I've definitely grappled with that on a personal level, because it can be a little draining at times. I don't think that the goal, at least with what I write, has ever been to victimize, right? And it's definitely easy to fall in that trap, or to fall into the, tendency of promoting a stereotype or an archetype that's just not healthy, right, or powerful, and it's just perpetuating, negative stigmas. But yeah, it's a challenge, I think, as an artist, as a writer, as a photojournalist. You have to document the reality, but at the same time, even if that reality can seem difficult or grim, you have to find the upside, right? Like with an essential worker, like working full time, exposing himself to COVID, maybe he has a sibling that contracted COVID, maybe he has an uncle that passed away from COVID, but he's not letting that defeat him. He's still showing up, he's still doing what he has to do, and he's not letting the circumstances define him. And so I think that the balance in itself is whether or not you're telling the whole story instead of just a piece of it.
Very cool. Do you think that the Somos Pilsen mural does work to battle these ideas of gentrification and displacement? And was that like a goal that you guys had in featuring the residents?
I think it helps in its own way, because it's going to tell the story. It's completely different than any other mural in this neighborhood, and I think it is going to stand out. I think Don Pedro's is its own staple and also has its own history in this neighborhood. I think the story of the father and the family and the mother, those are incredibly powerful stories. And, I think it's gonna serve its purpose of just trying to inform, right? Young people and anyone that walks by a little bit of the neighborhood and what it looks like, as opposed to what you find on Google or in Forbes magazine.
How do you choose who goes on the mural?
There was some moments there where there was some issues behind concerns of certain people being on it, and there were certain moments where I had to assert my opinion as to why these people needed to be on there, despite whatever concerns may have come up. But it was a conversation. It was about balance, I think, at the end of the day too, making sure that there's people from all sides of the neighborhood, that there's people that aren't just Mexican, but you have black families on the wall, young people, you have undocumented people, documented people, and I think it was about balance and diversity. I think that was it.
Can you tell us a little bit about this space that we're in? We're at 2200 Carpenter. What's it going to become?
We haven't announced it yet. This dude, we have. I think we have one more thing we have to do tomorrow morning. But the goal is to open by mid-June. I'm gonna have a soft opening that I'm organizing myself next month, so I'll definitely invite you guys if you want to come. This is gonna be called La Esquina, Community Center. I came up with the name. We got an award from the city of Chicago. Pablo basically, he identified this opportunity, and he hit me up and he was like, look, man, like you're a great writer. Like, can you try to do this? Like, and do you want to work with me on this? And we did, and we worked on it together, and we got the award from the city. I'm gonna be teaching workshops out of here, classes out of here for free. Pablo's gonna be doing the same thing. We're gonna have exhibits out of here, and I think the goal with this space is definitely not to center it around myself or Pablo. I think the goal is to have this space serve the community. If anybody else wants to do a workshop, wants to host an event, then this space is, do it. That's what this is here for. We don't really have a community space in Pilsen right now. After Radio Arte in your locality closed, there hasn't been anything else that sort of like has an open door and that's just there to serve, young people and to serve creatives, and that has that instructional capacity with that, which I think is super important. So for me, it's quite a feeling, because for me it comes just full circle, like all the way, because of my experience at Radio Arte. So for me, it's really powerful that I'm going to be able to kind of reciprocate that a little bit, with what I can do creatively in trying to teach and help other people learn about how to do that.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Selena mural and how that came to be? You alluded to it a little bit ago. But.
Yeah, no. I had this whole campaign with Carniceria Maribel about support your local corner store. Huge believer in supporting local businesses, and Maribel has a really interesting history behind it, and the story behind it, and the grandmother who came from Mexico and opened the shop up. So I've always been super proud and a fan of that corner store. And I just pitched the idea to the owner. I was like, yo, like, we need to do something with that wall. Like, we have to. And then he loved the idea of doing a mural for Selena, and Ascend is I think, unparalleled when it comes to portraits. Incredibly talented, and I've known him for a minute. We never really worked that much together, but we would constantly run into each other, and we had some mutual friends, and he was down and he did it, and we got the funding for it, and it blew up for sure.
One thing we've been exploring is how do murals come to be? Does someone commission them? You're a bit of an impresario. You're kind of coming up with the idea and convincing different parties to get involved. How do you think most murals in Pilsen come to be, or murals that you've been working on? Where do they come from?
To be honest with you, I don't know what other people do. I really don't. I think there's a lot of different ways people go about it. For me, the most important part is the building owner and the family. That's where I start the conversation. I introduce myself. Hey, my name is Mateo Zapata. I do XYZ. This is my bio. This is who I am. Do you want to work with me? Right? Because I'm telling you who I am. And, 10 times out of 10, it's been like, yeah, of course we do. Like, what's your idea? And I usually take it from there. And yeah, I mean, sometimes, I'll do it myself if the opportunity's there. I mean, now that stuff is opening back up, this summer I already have like 2 walls around here that I'm trying to do on a solo tip. But yeah, no, I am all about collaborating with people, or if I see an opportunity and I know an artist whose style is gonna just really pop and excel, I'm like, yo, I hit him up, hey, you should really like get on this ASAP, And it works the other way around too, to be completely honest with you. Sometimes there's an artist that's like, hey, I wanna do XYZ, and I'm like, nah, G, it's not gonna pop. And it's a creative difference, right? And I think that, that has to be understood, right? And
how much say does an owner have in the finished product? Because like is your task to respect the artistic vision of the artist, or to please
Some
the
of them
owner?
are a little touchy about it, you know. Some of them are like, hey, like what are you gonna put on there, you know? What do you mean, like what is this, you know? Like I had a conversation with the owner during the pandemic, and you know, they wanted me to do some stuff, but they were like, oh, you could do this but you can't do that, and I was like, whatever, I'm good. And they ended up putting up some super Hallmark type art. Insane. But no, I mean, I think the owners, for the most part, they're pretty open. As long as you're transparent with them about like, hey, this is what I'm gonna do. Like, is that cool? But I mean, you know, aside from that one instance, I don't think I've ever had an issue with the building owner.
Would you be willing to tell us some of the things that are exciting you about, like, some of the public art going up in Pilsen right now, and some of the stuff that's annoying you? One or both?
The controversy. I think it's good to see that there are younger people starting to throw down, and not just the OGs or the older folks or the people that have already been in the game for 10 years or the people that are like, oh, I am XYZ, whatever. You know, the divas and the egos aren't the only ones in the space. I think it's really good that you're starting to see a lot more young people that are like, no, I could do this too. Like, move, you know, and that's just a natural part of the course of, you know, any creative scene. So that's really cool. I think you're also starting to see a lot more women that are painting, and I don't think you saw that before. And that's one of the biggest, you know, critiques of the older schools. But I think the emergence of women doing public art, I think that is really, really cool. Because it's a whole other vibe. It's a whole other perspective, different energy, you know. And even just now, my guy's gonna open up a restaurant on 18th. He wants me to help him with, you know, the launch and whatever, the marketing, que esto y que lo otro. And he's like, who do I get to paint the front? And I'm like, get a woman. And he's like, who? And I'm like, that's who, you know. And I know she's gonna snap, you know. And I called her and told her. She's like, what? So yeah, I think that is also pretty interesting to see, right?
We've interviewed Sam Kirk. We've interviewed Sandra Anton Giorgi. Are there other women that you think we should keep
You got
our
to
eyes on?
interview Rocio Urbano.
Yeah.
She's from the neighborhood, actually grew up here. Y también de por acá, you got to interview Delilah Salgado. She's been here for a minute. She's definitely put her foot down, and she's dope. She snaps. She doesn't do that much, I think, as she did before, but when she pops up, she pops up. She's really dope. Who else? Rocio, Delilah. Man, there's this young woman. She goes by Kitty Saris. Kitty Saris, I think is what she goes by. She's doing a lot. She's popping up a lot of places. She's young. She's doing the pop-ups, you know, like, oh, hey, I do this, do that, pero también pinta. And I know she's doing her thing. I think that those, especially, I think that those would be really good to talk to for sure.
We'll follow up and look at them.
Yeah.
You mentioned younger artists coming in. This is something we've noticed. We've got the old guard, you've got the new guard.
Yeah.
Let me run an idea by you. This is something we've been talking about in class and that we've talked about with some other artists. There's a sense that the old guard were more communitarian. They involved the community in the painting.
They did.
They want to do stuff that empowers the community.
Yeah.
The new guard is more individualistic. It's more about expressing your own personal brand.
Me.
Brand.
Yeah.
It looks like this is resonating with you. Is this something you've seen or noticed? In the
Hell
artistry?
yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, no. It's very ego driven, man. And it's territorial. And that's where the clashes come, because you have people that aren't like that. And then you have people that are like that. And then you have some people that just, you know, put their head down, cower in the corner. And then there's some people that are like, what's good? You know what I mean? And Not everybody knows how to deal with that kind of energy, but you know, it's gonna happen. But Mauricio, he actually did a community day, which I thought was really dope. So the wall across the street from Los Comales, that's what he did. I think on his last day, he did a thing where he's like, hey, who wants to come out? You know, and yeah, not enough people do that, you know, and that's sort of the goal. I mean, that's what we're gonna try to do with this space, you know, is provide people with that opportunity to feel like, you know, let's collaboratively do something, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask a
Sure,
follow-up
yeah, please.
on that? How do you see that like as a reflection of like this new bicultural identity of like there's a lot of like rooted in the history of muralism is a sense of like community and like also that's rooted in like a lot of Latinx values and things. So how do you feel like that combined with like the new like this new generation of Latinx Americans?
I mean, every generation is going to define itself. I don't personally identify as Latinx, but I'm never going to tell another person how to identify themselves. That's totally oppressive, right? And that's, you know, every generation is going to figure it out. They have their own story. You see what I'm saying? So I think that, you know, the experience of me growing up is going to be way off the, you know, different side of the spectrum than a 10-year-old right now who's going to grow up. You know, Chicago was a different place. Society was different. You know, I grew up watching Rodney King, watching Leonard Clark get beat up half dead in Bridgeport. You know what I mean? I grew up in the era of like, you know, people using payphones. You know what I mean? Like, it was just a different world. So I think that every generation is going to define itself, and when they do it creatively, that's when you get to explore what that identity looks like.
I don't want to create a false dichotomy. There's the old school communitarians and the new school ego, me, individualistic. But you strike me as someone who's young, but still on the more communitarian side.
I grew up moving around a lot. I didn't just stay in Pilsen. I didn't just stay on my block. A lot of my friends did. You get caught in that territorial mindset. You get caught in that, no, this is me, you're over there, you know, it is what it is. I saw too much value in cross-cultural experiences and, you know, being cool with the Belizean kid from Uptown, right? But then also being cool with the El Salvadoran, you know, un Salvadoreño that grew up on Cullerton and Loomis. You know what I mean? To me, that I saw too much power in that growing up, and the more I've grown, the more I've learned, the more I continue to grow. You know, I think that those kind of experiences and being that open to other communities, other people that don't look like you, talk like you, are from where you're from, can teach you a lot. And, you know, maybe that was because I am Colombian and Chilean and I'm not gonna find that anywhere in Chicago. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, why am I gonna try to stick to just one bubble or to just one group or one side of the city if, you know, my identity itself doesn't even belong to any sort of specific box in this country. But I just see a lot of power in community, you know? I mean, even like the stuff that we saw happen the past 2 years with like, you know, the protests that I helped organize for Miguel Vega. You know, there were hundreds of people marching down 18th Street. That was literally me and one other person that were trying to raise awareness on that, right? And what happened is that you got solidarity, right? And so the thing is that you can also create solidarity through being creative and through art, not just to yell "fuck the police" at the top of your lungs in the middle of a street, you know, and protest shutting a street down, right? You can build solidarity on different kinds of levels. And to me, that's why I have that approach.
We're nearing our hour, so
No,
we're,
yeah,
we're going to
sure.
get to some fun questions in a
Yeah.
second, just a couple. But you mentioned in response to Mildred that you don't identify as Latinx.
Uh-huh.
Why not? Or can we ask how you identify?
I think that I never fit into any box in this country ever. I didn't like the name Hispanic. People still use that term, and that's a term that this government just assigned to people. And I think that the idea of identity is super complex in this country. If you look at the creation of the Chicano identity in California, right? Like they created their identity, but they also demanded for the state to acknowledge that identity. So when you're filling out any sort of boxes on any paperwork for the state of Illinois, you can check a box that says, I am Chicano. You know what I'm saying? That's power. That's challenging a system and forcing it to acknowledge your identity. And, for me, I don't like the anglicizing of the sound of the term Latinx. That is what kind of made me cringe a little bit when I first heard it. Because my first language was Spanish. I was ESL. My parents still don't know how I learned English, because we never spoke it at home. So I identify as an Afro-Latino of indigenous descent within the realm of how this country views race. But identity is a powerful thing, and it's also very sacred. Everybody has their own identity and should be able to define it as they see fit.
We need a label for this project. The question's partly selfish,
Yeah.
and we've settled on Latinx art in Pilsen or Latinx muralism in Pilsen.
Yeah.
You think that sounds right to you, or
So
we don't want to say just muralism in Chicago?
I know what you're saying. I mean, the thing is this, and this is where it gets interesting. I can put you in touch with over 50 people that have grown up in this neighborhood that do not identify as Latinx. And half of them are gonna be like, what is that? You see what I'm saying?
I do.
So it's definitely, I think, a matter of perspective and lens, because then when you impose identity on people, that's like, what are we doing? And identity is a fascinating thing.
Couple of fun questions. If
Yeah,
you'll
yeah, yeah.
indulge us in another 3 minutes.
No, you're good. I'm in no rush. You're good. You're good. No worries.
One of the audiences we have in mind for this is kids, because we're going to put this
That's
stuff
beautiful.
online. We
That's
hope
great.
that kids are going to be accessing this as they explore Pilsen, if they're doing
Wow.
school papers or research.
Yeah.
If a kid who's listening to this, who's in Chicago or elsewhere, wants to
Yeah.
get into the arts, what advice do you have?
Get a black book and just start sketching and start painting and start practicing and do what you want to do. Create what you want to create. Don't just sit there and draw a banana in a bowl because that's what the teacher said in our class. I mean, do it. Do it because it's class. You want to do your homework, get your A or whatever, but create what you want to create. That's what I would say. And don't ever let anyone try to tell you what to do or what you should do. Trust yourself, trust your own creative drive, and just be honest. Bruce Lee had this whole thing about his style of fighting. He called it honest expression. He's like, if you're honestly expressing yourself, you're going to be incredibly powerful. And I think that rings true with being creative.
Of course.
How would you like your artwork to be remembered?
As real.
What recommendations do you have for someone who's new to Pilsen? What do you want them to check out or see or experience?
Just go around. Don't just stick to the east side of the neighborhood. Check out Caminos on a Friday night. Walk to the murals that are on 18th and Western, not just the murals that are on 18th and Halstead. The murals over there on 18th and Western are incredibly powerful. One of them has a sign that says stay out of Colombia. Yeah, I would just say, just walk around and don't just stick to 18th Street. Walk down 19th, walk down 21st, walk down 17th Street, go to a corner store, go to Harrison Park and, support the local street vendor. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want us to know that you want us to know for this project that you can enlighten us on regarding your work in the community as an artist?
It's important for us to tell our stories, and I appreciate you all doing the work that you're doing. And I think the more of us that work at telling our own stories, the stronger the impact it's going to have for that next group of young people that want to learn about the city that they're from and what happened in that city to get to where it's at.
Do you think, what role do murals in particular play in this storytelling? You've mentioned telling stories a lot,
Yeah.
Do you think murals are uniquely positioned to tell stories as opposed to other art forms?
I think every art form can tell a story. I just think that, the history of muralism in Mexico and in Colombia, Cuba, Puerto Rico, throughout, Latin America has always been to tell a story. Like that was its purpose, But I think every art form can tell a story.
Great. You guys have anything else? We've gone 1 minute over. Mateo Zapata, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you guys.
Appreciate it. It's so
Appreciate
enlightening.
it. Yeah.